The SOS, the night sky above Earth was silent, but below, the world was anything but calm. For weeks, humanity had been fighting a war they were losing. Cities lay in ruins, and the once thriving nations of Earth had been reduced to desperate pockets of resistance. The enemy had come from the stars, an unstoppable force, alien invaders unlike anything humanity had ever seen. With no allies and no hope, humanity's survival seemed impossible. In the heart of Earth's last remaining stronghold, a small group of engineers worked tirelessly in a secret underground facility. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wires and stale coffee, the only light coming from the soft hum of machines. Among them was Lieutenant Sarah Michaels, the last remaining commander of Earth's communication network. She sat at the center of a massive console, her fingers dancing over the buttons as she tried one final time to send out a message. "Come on, please," she whispered to herself, eyes bloodshot from days of sleeplessness. The tension was unbearable, the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. She wasn't just sending a message. She was sending the last hope for humanity, a final cry for help. She pressed the button, and the transmission began. The message would travel far and wide, beyond Earth's borders, to any species that could hear it. The message was simple, but urgent. "This is Earth. We are under attack. Our last stand begins now. We need help. Please. Anyone. Please respond." The words echoed in the silence of the room, a moment of vulnerability. This was humanity's last attempt to save themselves, but deep down, Sarah feared it was already too late. Outside, the sky remained dark, but soon something strange happened. The skies began to flicker with unnatural lights. At first, it was just a glimmer, like a star blinking erratically. Then it grew brighter, flashing in rhythmic pulses. It wasn't just a normal light. It was a response. Could it be? Sarah gasped. She had hoped, but she never expected this. She quickly tapped into the signal and saw the same strange lights patterning the skies above. It wasn't just random static. It was intelligent communication. The lights began to form patterns, slowly, as if they were responding to the distress. "Call, Sarah. We're getting something." A technician's voice broke through her thoughts. He was at another console, staring at the screen with wide eyes. "On screen," Sarah said, her heart pounding. She needed answers. If they had all eyes out there, now was the time to find them. The screen flickered, and then, just as quickly, a series of symbols appeared. The symbols were alien, incomprehensible, but there was no mistaking it. This was a response. "We've got an answer," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not in any language we know." The team scrambled to decipher the message. Could this be the help they had been praying for? Were the aliens responding in a way that would mean salvation? A moment of hope filled the room, but it quickly turned to dread as the symbols started to change. What started as seemingly innocent messages soon shifted into something much darker. The screen displayed a warning. The symbols now showed a picture, an image of a fleet, vast and terrifying. It was not the image of an army coming to save Earth. No, this was something far worse. That the fleet shown on the screen wasn't friendly. It was an invasion force. It was a fleet of total annihilation. Sarah's hand shook as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It couldn't be. These beings weren't coming to help. They were coming to destroy. This was not salvation. This was the end. "Everyone, get ready," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she realized the terrible truth. "They're coming." The screen flickered again, showing the full scope of the fleet, the Deathworlders, a race known across the stars for their brutality. The galaxy had been warned about them, but no one had ever believed they would come to Earth. Yet here they were, answering humanity's cry for help. With annihilation. Outside the bunker, the world held its breath. Humanity had sent its SOS, but the answer they received was not one of rescue. It was the call of destruction, the last. Hope was fading fast. Earth had no defense, no allies, and no time to prepare. The fleet was on its way, and Earth was about to face its worst nightmare. And so, a countdown began. The war for survival was just starting, and Sarah knew that the fight for humanity's future had only just begun. Asterisk, the fleet mobilizes the silent. Hum of the underground facility was broken only by the rapid tapping of keyboards, the frantic scramble of technicians trying to understand the gravity of what was happening. Lieutenant Sarah Michaels stood still, frozen in front of the screen, as the image of the Deathworlders' fleet loomed larger. It was vast, countless ships stretched across the starry expanse, each one a titan of destruction. There was no doubt. Left in her mind, Earth had made a fatal mistake by calling for help. What ... are we looking at? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, but the words seemed to echo in the cold silence of the room. Her heart raced, but there was no time for panic. She had to act. They all had to act. The rest of the team remained silent, too stunned to speak. They had hoped for a signal of salvation, but what they saw was a nightmare that had come to life. The images on the screen were clear. Now these weren't just ships. They were harbingers of extinction. "They're not here to help," one of the technicians muttered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "They're here to erase us." Sarah's mind raced. The Deathworlders were infamous across the galaxy for their brutal invasions. Stories of their ruthless conquest, of entire worlds being wiped clean, circulated in hushed tones in every corner of the universe. And now, the same fleet was heading toward Earth, responding to their SOS, not with help. The team worked quickly to triangulate the fleet's location, their screens flickering as they accessed deeper levels of information. The fleet was already in motion, headed directly for Earth at an alarming speed. "We have less than 12 hours, another technician said, his face pale as he looked at Sarah. "They're mobilizing fast. There's no way we can stop them with our current defenses." Sarah's mind was working overtime. There had to be a way to survive. There had to be something they could do. But the odds were against them. Earth's defenses were outdated. The weapons they had, the ships in orbit, were nothing compared to the Deathworlders' technological might. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, a voice that didn't belong to anyone in the room. "Commander Michaels, we've detected a high-level transmission from the Deathworlders." Everyone turned toward the new voice, a member of the communications team who had just entered the room. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked quickly, feeling the weight of the question as it left her lips. "It's not just a message, it's a command," the technician replied. "They're communicating with us directly. It's a demand." "Demand?" Sarah repeated, her eyes narrowing. "What do they want?" The technician quickly pulled up the message. It was incomprehensible at first, filled with strange symbols and patterns that only made sense to a few alien languages. But as Sarah's team scrambled to decipher it, one word stood out, a chilling command: surrender. The Deathworlders were offering no terms of negotiation. They weren't giving humanity a chance to fight. This was the final demand. If humanity didn't surrender, the fleet would destroy them completely. There was no compromise, no middle ground. "We can't just give in," Sarah muttered. She slammed her fist against the console in frustration. "We've never surrendered before. We can't do it now." "We're running out of time," one of the engineers said, voice trembling. "The fleet is closer than we thought. If we don't come up with something soon, Earth is finished." Sarah's thoughts raced, but her heart beat steadily with resolve. Surrender. That was the last thing Earth would ever do. But what could they do in the face of such overwhelming power? What could they offer to hold back the annihilation that was coming? "We need a plan," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "We're going to need every ally we can find, and we'll need to fight smarter than ever. If we stand a chance at surviving this, we need to hit them where it hurts. We need to understand their weaknesses." A quiet tension settled over the room. No one spoke. Everyone knew how impossible it sounded. Suddenly, Sarah stood up straight, a look of determination flashing across her face. "There's one thing we can try. We have no guarantee it'll work, but it's our only shot. We'll need to re-establish contact with other species, those who might have fought the Deathworlders before. Even if we can't rely on them for help right away, we can learn from their experiences." Her eyes scanned the room. "We're Earth. We've survived worse. And now we'll do it again." As the team began to move, preparing to send out encrypted signals to any allies they might still have in the galaxy, Sarah knew that it wasn't just Earth's future at stake. It was the future of every world, every species that had ever been threatened by the Deathworlders. They couldn't let them win. Time was ticking. The Deathworlders' fleet was coming, and the fate of the entire planet rested in their hands. The war for Earth's survival was only just beginning. But Sarah was determined. Whatever it took, she wasn't going to let Earth fall without a fight. The countdown had begun. Asked ChatGPT *. The first strike. As the Deathworlder fleet loomed closer, the world's last remaining defenses stood weak and vulnerable. There was a desperate hope among the humans that somehow they could delay the inevitable, but deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for humanity's future. The underground bunker hummed with frantic energy as Sarah and her team worked to establish any connection they could with other civilizations, races that might have faced the Deathworlders before. But each call was met with silence, or worse, messages of doom. The Deathworlders had destroyed too many, and there were no reinforcements coming. Outside the bunker, Earth's remaining forces scrambled to prepare for the worst. The air was thick with tension as soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike tried to find their place in the crumbling world. Some were hopeful, others paralyzed by fear, but all knew that today would be a turning point. Sarah, however, couldn't afford to give in to fear. She had a plan, though it was far from perfect. There had to be some way to fight back, even against an enemy like this. She wasn't going to give up without trying everything she could. "Sarah, you need to see this," one of the techs called from across the room. She rushed over to the console, her heart pounding. The screen flickered, showing real-time data of the Deathworlder fleet's position. They were closer now, far closer than anyone had anticipated. In less than an hour, the fleet would be within Earth's atmosphere. But there was something else, something strange. "They've stopped moving," Sarah said, leaning in closer. "Why aren't they advancing?" The tech worked quickly, zooming in on the data. His fingers hovered over the keys, his brow furrowing. It's a trap, Sarah. They're pausing for a reason. They want us to believe we have more time. They're setting up to strike harder." "What kind of strike?" Sarah demanded, her voice urgent. Before the tech could answer, the ground trembled, and a sudden, deafening roar filled the air. The bunker shook violently, rattling everything inside. The lights flickered as the blast from the first strike reached the surface of the Earth. The shockwave from the enemy's weapons had just hit. Sarah's heart sank. The first strike had begun. "Get to the surface," she ordered, her voice now cold and commanding. "Everyone, move now. We need to see the damage." Within minutes, Sarah and her team made their way to the surface. The sight was worse than anything they had prepared for. Entire cities lay in ruins. The skies were black with smoke, and the ground was scorched as if the very earth itself had been set on fire. A sudden realization hit Sarah. The Deathworlders weren't just targeting military installations. They were targeting everything humanity's legacy, its culture, its very essence. The destruction wasn't just about wiping out resistance. It was about erasing humanity from existence. "Sarah, look," one of the soldiers shouted, pointing to the horizon. In the distance, the shape of the Deathworlder fleet was unmistakable. Their massive ships hovered ominously above the ruins. But then, something worse happened. The ships began to descend. They were releasing something that would finish the job. Chemical weapons? Biological agents? Sarah muttered, her voice thick with dread. "We need to stop them, now." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The Deathworlders weren't just bombing Earth. They were preparing to unleash an unimaginable plague. Their weapons weren't just designed to kill. They were designed to ensure that humanity wouldn't be able to rebuild. This wasn't just genocide. It was a complete extermination of any chance for a future. But Sarah wouldn't allow that. Not if she could help it. She quickly activated a come signal to the remaining human forces. "We've got to fight back. Get to the underground bunkers. We've got to use whatever weapons we have left. We can't let them wipe us out." The soldiers, their faces grim but determined, nodded in agreement. They would make their stand. Sarah's mind raced. They had no hope of stopping the entire fleet, but maybe, just maybe, there was one way to deliver a crippling blow. "Prepare. The last line of defense," Sarah ordered. "We're going to strike them where it hurts the most. We can't match their firepower, but we can sabotage their weapons." The human resistance began to move swiftly, each step more deliberate than the last. Sarah knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The Deathworlders' first strike had left Earth teetering on the edge of annihilation. But there was still hope, however small it might be. And as Sarah looked up at the sky, watching the Deathworlder fleet hover in silence, she realized the truth. This wasn't the end of humanity. It was the beginning of the fight for their future. In the face of extinction, humanity had no choice but to fight. And fight they would, even if it meant standing against the most terrifying force in the galaxy. Ask ChatGPT *, desperate measures. The world had never felt so fragile. Sarah stood amidst the chaos, watching as the first few survivors scrambled to make it to the underground. Bunkers, the sound of distant explosions ringing in the air. Above, the Deathworlders' fleet continued to hover ominously, their massive vessels blocking out the sun and casting a shadow over the ruins below. For a brief moment, the Earth seemed to stand still, as if holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The first wave of destruction had already decimated entire cities. Now, with the Deathworlders preparing to unleash their deadly biological weapons, it felt like humanity's fate was sealed. But Sarah wasn't ready to give in. She couldn't be. "Sarah," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Captain Derek Lawson, a seasoned military officer who had been part of the early defense forces. His face was grim, but his eyes held a fire that reminded her why she had to keep fighting. "We've got a plan. We're not done yet." "Plan?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing with skepticism. "What's left to plan? We're out of time. They've already destroyed our cities, and now they're dropping plague bombs. Our only hope was to signal for help, but no one's coming. We're on our own." Derek shook his head, unshaken. "We've still got one thing they don't. A weapon hidden deep within the bowels of this base. It's a prototype we've been working on in secret. It's humanity's last chance." "Prototype?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" Derek's expression grew more serious. "It's a disruptor. Not just any disruptor. This one's capable of shutting down any alien technology within a certain radius. We're not sure if it'll work, but it's our best shot at taking down their fleet." The implications of what he was saying hit Sarah like a wave. The Deathworlders had advanced technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. A weapon that could disrupt their fleet? It was humanity's last hope. If it worked, it could at least give them a fighting chance. "Where is it?" Sarah asked quickly, her pulse quickening. "In the heart of this base, buried under layers of security. We've been working on it for months, but it was too risky to deploy without knowing how to counter the fallout. Now, ... We don't have a choice." Derek's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the weight of his words. There was no going back. Sarah didn't hesitate. "We'll get it," gathered the team. "We're heading down." The bunker's corridors were dark and narrow, the walls lined with hastily written signs and symbols, warning of traps and sealed rooms. The closer they got to the prototype, the more the sense of urgency grew. Earth's last hope was buried in a vault that no one had ever intended to open. When they finally arrived at the chamber, Sarah's heart was in her throat. The vault door was massive, built to withstand the worst kinds of attacks. But this was different. The door wasn't meant to keep enemies out. It was meant to keep the last desperate weapon of humanity hidden. As the team worked to unlock the door, the tension was unbearable. Sarah could hear her heartbeat in her ears, each second more precious than the last. They had no idea how long they had before the Deathworlders launched their final strike. The door slid open with a low, grinding sound, and inside, the disruptor was revealed. It was a strange device, sleek and angular, humming softly with energy. Sarah stared at it for a moment before nodding. "This is it." "We're not sure how it works," Derek admitted, "but if we can get it close enough to their fleet, it could disrupt their technology. It's risky. If it doesn't work, we'll be out of options." Sarah's mind raced, but she knew there was no time to think. The Deathworlders were already releasing their next wave of destruction. Humanity had one shot, one chance to hit them where it hurt. "We're going to need a distraction," Sarah said, her mind working fast. "Something to draw their attention away while we get this device into position." She turned to the communications team. "Send a false signal. Lead them to believe we've gathered our forces for a final stand. It'll give us the window we need to get the disruptor into position. And once we've deployed it, then we make them regret ever setting their sights on Earth," Derek finished. Sarah's lips twisted into a determined smile. For the first time in hours, she felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep fighting. The team rushed into action. The countdown had begun. As Sarah and Derek moved out, the sound of engines and weapons in the distance grew louder. The Deathworlders were already releasing their bombs from orbit. The air was thick with the smoke of destruction. But Sarah knew one thing: this was their chance. The plan was dangerous, reckless even, but it was humanity's last shot at survival. If they couldn't stop the fleet with this disruptor, then Earth would fall. But if they could just find a way to get close enough. "We're not going down without a fight," Sarah muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The enemy fleet loomed overhead, casting an even darker shadow as they prepared to unleash their full power. But as the humans made their move, they carried with them something more dangerous than any weapon: their will to survive. The fight was far from over. The truth revealed the battle had taken a dark turn, but Sarah's resolve had never been stronger. As Earth's last defenses crumbled, the disruptor, humanity's final hope, was now being carefully transported to a high-altitude launch site nestled within the rugged mountains. The team moved with precision, knowing that every second counted. But the air around them was thick with a sense of foreboding, as if the universe itself had drawn in a breath, waiting for what came next. Derek moved beside Sarah, keeping a sharp eye on the skies. The Deathworlders' fleet hovered like an unstoppable storm above them. Their weapons had already devastated several cities, but the real nightmare was yet to come. The biological bombs were only the beginning of their plan. Whatever came next, it would be Earth's final trial dot. As they reached the edge of the mountains, Derek stopped and turned to Sarah. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told you. Something I think you need to know before we go any further." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her focus unwavering. She had no time for delays, but she could sense the urgency in Derek's voice. He wasn't one to hesitate, not in a crisis like this. Something weighed on him heavily. "What is it?" she asked. Derek glanced over his shoulder, as if making sure they were alone. The group was now scattered across the rocky terrain, setting up the launch site. The Deathworlders. They didn't just decide to invade Earth on a whim. It's more complicated than that. We've been part of something much bigger than we realized. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the cold grip of suspicion take hold of her. "What do you mean?" Derek took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Before the invasion, there were rumors, whispers in the higher circles of the Earth government, some things that didn't make sense. Earth's defense technologies. They weren't all human-made. Some of it we borrowed, and not just from any race. The words hit Sarah like a punch. "What are you saying?" "That we've had contact with the Deathworlders before," Derek finished quietly. "Not directly, but through back channels. Our technologies, our advancements, some of them came from them." Sarah staggered back, her thoughts swirling in a haze of disbelief. The room seemed to spin around her as she tried to process what Derek was saying. We've been dealing with them all along? Are you telling me that the Deathworlders ... have been here before?" Derek nodded solemnly. "Yes, and this is what makes all of this even worse. The Deathworlders didn't just decide to invade out of nowhere. They were watching us. They saw our potential, our growth, and they realized that our development had reached a level where it could threaten them, not just as a species, but as a power in the galaxy. But why now? Why strike at Earth, now of all times?" Sarah demanded, her mind racing. "They've been manipulating us from the shadows," Derek explained, his voice low but firm. "Earth's technological advancements, our military strategies, they've been nudging us in certain directions. The Deathworlders wanted to see just how far we could go before they had to intervene. The truth is, we were never meant to survive this long. Their plan was always to stop us before we could become a real threat to their dominance." Sarah's thoughts were in turmoil. The realization was crushing, an unbearable weight pressing down on her chest. The very technologies they had relied on humanity's pride and hope had come from their enemies, the very beings who now sought to destroy them. Earth had never been truly independent in its rise to power. Every step forward had been under the watchful eyes of their oppressors. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" Sarah asked, voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Derek hesitated, his expression torn. "Some did. There were a few who tried to warn us, those who saw the truth. But they were silenced, branded as conspiracists, dismissed. But now, now, we're facing the consequences. We can't deny it anymore. We were played." A bitter silence hung between them as the truth settled into Sarah's bones. The enemy they were fighting wasn't just a fleet from across the stars. It was a manipulation years in the making. Earth was a pawn in a game much larger than they had ever understood. "Then we're not just fighting for survival," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with a realization that sent a chill down her spine. "We're fighting for something more. We're fighting to reclaim our freedom." Derek nodded, his gaze hardening. "Exactly. We've been given a chance. But we're the ones who have to decide what happens next. If we win this, it won't just be about defeating the Deathworlders. It'll be about taking back control of our future." Sarah stood tall, the weight of the truth now clear in her mind. She had always known that Earth's survival was at stake, but now it was about more than just defending their planet. It was about reclaiming their independence, their right to choose their own destiny. She turned to face the sky once more, the Deathworlders' fleet hovering just beyond the clouds. They were waiting, but now so were they. "We're not going to be their puppets any longer," Sarah muttered under her breath. "We're going to show them that humanity is more than just a game to be played." With newfound resolve, Sarah and Derek led the team to the launch site where the disruptor would be deployed. There was no turning back now. The Deathworlders had underestimated humanity once before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. As the countdown began, Sarah knew that this fight was far more than just survival. It was a war for freedom, a war for control, and a war that humanity could never afford to lose. The truth had been revealed, and with it, the true battle had begun. Asterisk, asterisk. Last stand. The night was cold as Sarah and her team reached the summit, where the disruptor was carefully placed on its launch platform. The device hummed with an eerie energy, its sleek form a reminder of humanity's ingenuity, but also a symbol of how much they had relied on the very force that now sought their annihilation. The stars above them seemed distant, the black sky pressing down like a suffocating blanket. The Deathworlders' fleet hovered ominously in the distance, a sea of dark ships circling Earth, ready to bring its final wrath. As the team finished preparing the disruptor, Sarah felt the weight of everything that had led them here. The world as they knew it was teetering on the edge of oblivion. If they failed, Earth would be wiped out, and with it, the dream of freedom. But if the disruptor worked, if they could hit the fleet where it hurt, there might still be a chance for humanity to rise from the ashes. "Sarah, we're in position," Derek called from the launch platform. His voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the tension beneath it. "Good," she replied, forcing herself to focus. "We just need to hold them off a little longer. They can't get a clear shot at us while we deploy this thing." The sounds of distant explosions echoed from below, the remnants of Earth's cities still burning. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and destruction. It was clear that the Deathworlders weren't interested in negotiating. Their strikes had been relentless, each wave designed to break the human spirit. And yet, here they were, on the verge of attempting something impossible. The ground trembled beneath them. Again, as the Deathworlders' fleet released a new barrage of weapons, a barrage that would surely crush any remaining resistance. Yet Sarah refused to look away from the horizon. There was still time. There had to be. The communications officer's voice crackled over the comms. "Sarah, we've intercepted a signal from the Deathworlders. It's a message directly aimed at us." "Put it through," Sarah ordered, though she had no illusions about what they would say. The screen flickered, and a garbled voice filled the air, distant but clear enough to understand. "You are defying your rightful end, humans. This planet will be purged. You should have surrendered when you had the chance. You are nothing more than insects. You will die, and your world will burn." Sarah's grip tightened around the disruptor's activation controls. The words were meant to break them, to make them feel the futility of their fight. But she wasn't listening to the Deathworlders anymore. Not when their threats were hollow, their cruelty nothing more than the final cries of a dying empire. "Let them talk," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're here to do more than survive. We're here to show them that they underestimated us. Earth is not theirs to destroy." She turned to Derek, who gave her a steady nod. "The disruptor's ready. Just give the signal." "Now," Sarah said, her voice steady as she turned toward the device. The team scattered to their posts, each of them knowing the importance of this moment. This was the last line of defense. This was the moment they either saved or lost everything. The countdown began on the platform. Seconds turned to minutes as the device powered up, the humming sound growing louder with each passing second. Sarah watched, her breath shallow, as the energy levels on the screen spiked. "Are you ready?" Derek asked, his voice strained as he monitored the final readings. "As ready as we'll ever be," Sarah replied. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she couldn't let it show. Not now. Not when they were so close. The last wave of explosions from the Deathworlders' fleet illuminated the sky, lighting up the horizon with fiery destruction. And then it happened. The disruptor activated. A burst of brilliant blue energy shot into the sky, arcing high above them. It expanded rapidly, a pulse that seemed to shake the very atmosphere. The Deathworlder fleet faltered as the pulse collided with their technology. For a moment, everything stood still. And then the chaos began. The fleet's massive ships trembled as their systems flickered and sputtered. Their weapons fell silent, their shields dropping in waves. The once invincible ships of the Deathworlders were now vulnerable, helpless against the very technology they had crafted to dominate the galaxy. But Sarah knew that this moment was fleeting. They had disrupted their systems, but the Deathworlders weren't done. They would fight to the bitter end. The fleet might be temporarily crippled, but they still had weapons, and they still had soldiers on the ground. "We've got a window," Derek shouted over the comms. "It's working. We need to push forward now." Without hesitation, Sarah gave the order. "All teams, move out. We need to make them pay for every life they've taken. It's time to finish this." The ground shook as the remaining human forces launched their final attack, using the momentary weakness in the Deathworlder fleet to strike back. It was a battle like no other, a war fought with desperation and a burning desire to reclaim their future. Sarah stood at the forefront, her eyes locked on the horizon as the first human counterattacks began to hit. The disruptor had done its job. It had crippled the enemy's fleet, and now humanity had a chance to fight back. But the real battle was just beginning. The Deathworlders had underestimated the will of humanity. They had thought Earth would fall, that its people would be wiped away like so many before them. But Earth was not a world that could be easily defeated. It had risen before, and now it was rising again. As the battle raged on, Sarah knew that they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something greater, a future that had been stolen from them, a world that had been threatened but would never be erased. This was their moment, their last stand, and they were going to make sure the Deathworlders would never forget it. The fight for Earth had only just begun. The aftermath. Pulse from the disruptor had done what no one had thought possible. The Deathworlder fleet had been crippled. The once mighty ships that loomed over Earth now hovered helplessly, their once impenetrable shields shattered and their weapons useless. For the first time since the invasion began, the tide of battle shifted. But the victory was short-lived. Sarah stood on the high ridge overlooking the battlefield, her eyes scanning the horizon. The ground still smoldered from the last wave of explosions, and the air was thick with the scent of burning cities. The first wave of humanity's counterattack had pushed back the Deathworlders, if only momentarily, but their victory came at a high cost. The human resistance forces had suffered heavy losses. The survivors were few, and the threat was far from over. Sarah's mind raced as she observed the chaos around her. The Deathworlders might have lost their technological advantage, but they were still relentless. The ground troops began to mobilize giant war machines that stomped across the Earth, their sheer presence enough to shake the ground beneath them. The Deathworlders had a final, terrifying weapon they had yet to unleash. Derek stood next to Sarah, his face smeared with dirt and exhaustion. His eyes were bloodshot, but there was a glimmer of hope in them. "We did it, Sarah," he said, though his voice carried a weight of disbelief. "For a moment, we actually stopped them." "We've only just begun," Sarah replied, her voice hard. The Death Worlders will never accept defeat so easily. They'll regroup. They'll strike back, and when they do, we need to be ready. As the final human forces moved to secure their position, the Death Worlders on the ground began to deploy their most terrifying weapon, colossal walkers. These towering war machines were designed for destruction, their massive legs grinding across the earth with terrifying ease. Each one was a fortress of steel and death, armed with enough firepower to level entire cities in minutes. "We need to take them out now, or we're finished," Sarah said, her heart racing. "If they get any closer to the disruptor's position, we'll lose everything." The remaining resistance forces began to move out, setting up traps and preparing for a final push. But Sarah knew that no matter how many traps they set, the Death Worlders would still have the upper hand in terms of sheer power. They were relentless, and their technology was too advanced for Earth's surviving forces to handle on their own. Asterisk suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. Sarah felt it before she heard it, an explosion, massive enough to shake the very earth they stood on. The skies lit up with bright flashes as a new barrage of weapons was launched from the Death Worlder fleet. The battle was intensifying, and this time they were attacking in full force. "This is it," Derek said, his voice tight. "We either stand and fight or we run. There's no other choice now." Sarah didn't flinch. She had already made her choice. She wasn't going to run not when humanity had come this far. "Get to the disruptor," she commanded. "We're activating it again. We might only have one more shot at this." The team scrambled to their positions, moving quickly as the ground shook with the intensity of the Death Worlders' weapons. Sarah sprinted alongside Derek, every step heavy with the weight of what was at stake. If they couldn't use the disruptor, again, humanity would be doomed. There was no other option. This was their final stand. Asterisk. As they reached the disruptor's control panel, Sarah's hands moved quickly over the buttons, activating the device once again. The energy readings were fluctuating, and the entire area felt charged with static. It was their last shot. Desperate gambit. The sky overhead seemed to crack open as the Death Worlders launched their final assault, sending wave after wave of firepower toward Earth's defenses. The ground began to tremble as the walkers advanced, their guns locked and loaded, preparing for the inevitable clash. The moment the disruptor fired, an enormous shockwave of energy shot upward, crashing into the Death Worlders' fleet. The walkers faltered for a moment, their systems flickering as the pulse of energy hit them. The disruptor was working, but it was pushing its limits. Sarah watched as the walkers slowed, their weapons losing power. "It's working!" Derek shouted, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and joy. But Sarah wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. The battle was far from over. The Death Worlders were still fighting back, and their desperation only made them more dangerous. They began to deploy their soldiers' foot soldiers, who surged forward with terrifying speed, their eyes glowing with a malevolent energy. Earth's forces were scattered, weak from the earlier assaults, and Sarah knew this would be their final test. Human resistance fought with everything they had left, their determination outmatching the Death Worlders' cruelty. Each soldier, each civilian who had picked up a weapon, was fighting not just for their own lives, but for the future of their planet. Amidst the chaos, Sarah's thoughts turned to what they had lost and what they still had to gain. This wasn't just a battle for Earth anymore. It was a battle for their very identity, for the right to determine their own future without the oppressive hand of the Death Worlders hanging over them. It was a fight for the soul of humanity. As the last of the Death Worlder walkers fell, the ground seemed to quiet. The skies cleared, and the rumbling of explosions slowly began to subside. Sarah stood tall, her eyes scanning the horizon. They had won at least for now, but as the survivors gathered, looking up at the wreckage of the Death Worlders' fleet, Sarah knew one thing. Humanity had proven it could survive. But the war was far from over. The universe would never be the same again, and Earth would never be the same again. Asterisk.